We first took a look at the Invincible 33 Power Cat at the Palmer Boat Show back in 2023, and back then it was confined to the show stand. Well, move on a year, the winds are blowing, the seas are rough, and we got a great opportunity to take her out and find out if this is as good a sea boat as they tell us it is. So we're out on the water now at the helm of this Invincible 33 catamaran, and yeah, there's loads of deck space around this boat, but their helm position is very workmanlike indeed. We've got three proper offshore seats, each with individual bolsters. We've also got a good sturdy wheel bang in the centre of the console, in the centre of the boat actually, exactly where you'd want it. And of course we got this enormous, very heavy duty aluminium T-top on here, connected directly to the screen. Plus we've got these little sort of side panels as well, flared outwards just to give you a little bit of extra protection at the helm too. But the helm position itself is a little bit peculiar on this particular test boat because of the physical frame of the owner of this boat, who is relatively short. So if I'm in the bolster position, standing upright, I kind of have to reach down a little bit for the wheel and the throttle, but I can, because we've got a cushion lining at the aft edge of this console, I can sort of jam myself in there, get a little bit lower, and that's moderately comfortable. And what we have here is a slightly raised deck level and a slightly raised seating unit, just to lift the owner up a little for better visibility. So it is a slightly peculiar helm position for a 6-footer. If I sit myself up here again, I'm reaching down a little, but obviously if you choose to spec one of these for yourself, then you can have it built to your frame too. And we've had a drive this morning, and it's quite difficult to drive to these conditions, as I'm about to prove right now. But I have to say, as we're doing so, this boat has been looking after us a treat. Now I'll strap on the kill cord, and we'll start off by running broadly along the seas with the seas on our port beam, and see how we go there. I've got it on the manual trim, so we'll trim her right in just to kick off. And we've got a couple of 400 horsepower outboards on the transom here today. You can up that right up to 450 or even 500, or you can stop short with the 300s, but this, they reckon, is exactly where this boat wants to be. The boat's pretty much in its element with these engines, and as we get her up onto the plane and just lift those legs just to elevate the bow a touch, well, we're passing 25 knots, moving on towards 30, and as you can see, these seas are a bit of a mess. But as we get a little bit of air, as we get it a little wrong, you're anticipating a bit of an impact as you come down, because you're used to monohull. You're bending your legs, waiting for that impact, and it doesn't really come. It's pretty soft, I have to say, very soft. And what else has surprised me is how dry it is. Into the head sea, we do have to take a little bit of that pace off just to avoid getting too much air. But again, if you get a bit more than you wanted, the landing, just like that, soft and easy and very friendly for the people you might happen to have on board. Now let's turn her to starboard again, and as we do so, it's worth noticing a couple of things. Now firstly, with most cats, when you turn her, she will heel out. With this one, because it uses an asymmetrical hull design, it heels ever so slightly in, which for monohull fans is quite an attractive trait. Feels far more natural. And one other thing that we ought to mention while we're out here, if we can get her up to speed again, is the fact that the more pace you put on, the more joy you get from the tunnels under this hull. Now we've got some good clearance at the forward end, so there's no slapping on the wave shapes, no puffing out of high pressure spray over the bow. But as that air travels back through the tunnels, well, it creates high pressure zones. And that's helped, of course, by the fact that we've got a relatively modest beam here. And those high pressure zones, they give you a lift for extra efficiency the faster you go, and they also give you a softer re-entry when you do come back down onto the surface. top end, this boat should be going to around about mid-high 40s, around about 48 knots, around about 65 miles per hour. We're stopping short on that today, getting up to about 38 knots, but in seas like this, that's a pretty good rate of progress. And it needs to be, because that's what these boats are all about. They come from South Florida, and in that part of the world, people will routinely go 100, 120 miles offshore to a fishing spot, so they want to get there fast. And when you get in those distances, sometimes the seas are going to kick up a bit, so you want to get there safely and in comfort. And that is exactly what this boat is proving that it can achieve. Now I'll bring her down to a standstill now and just point her bows into those seas just to keep everyone behind me comfortable. Because one other thing I want to talk about is the size of the fuel tank. Now today it's been quite difficult to get proper running figures, proper performance figures, so we can assess the relative running efficiency of this boat. What we've been seeing, around about 30 knots, is about 4.5 litres per mile. But this boat, because it's designed not just to be fast but to be long range, it has a 1500 litre tank, or a pair of 750 litre tanks. So even if you're saving 20% redundancy, you're still looking at 1200 litres. So 300, 400 nautical miles. That kind of range is not a problem for this boat at all. It's clear then that this is exactly the sea boat they claimed it was. It's very reassuring, very safe. In fact, if you've got loved ones who feel a bit nervous about fast open monohulls, then this could very much be the antidote. But one thing I mentioned while I was driving it was the beam. And of course the beam is critical to any cat. So let's step off at the bow and spin around and take a look at the parameters of the boat. Because what we have here is a boat that measures 33 feet and 11 inches and comes with a 10-foot 3-inch beam. That's about 30% of the overall length, and that's the kind of figure you might expect of a monohull rather than a power cat. So it's clear that space is not the chief priority, and yet if you look at it, space does seem peculiarly generous. So let's step on board at the forepeak. Not so much a forepeak as a very large squared off bow platform, nice and flat, loads of tread plate machined into that fiberglass, so you can walk about on that no trouble if you need to. We've got a couple of deep storage spaces there, drained, perfect for your lines and fenders on either side of that central anchor. Now what you tend to expect on a boat designed chiefly for fishing is fantastic freedom of movement, and that is exactly what we get. Just look at the size, the breadth, the depth of these side decks. They orbit that central furniture, run all the way from the cockpit to the forepeak, and they're entirely single level, entirely obstruction free. Really, really easy to make your way around this boat. We also got these guardrails built into the bulwarks, and we also have cushions integrated into the bulwarks too. So you can just brace your thigh and really pull on a rod if you've got a troublesome fish. Now let's head aft towards the cockpit down the port side, because that cockpit is also pretty much exactly what you'd expect of a classical sports fisher. Big open deck space, loads and loads of space, deep and secure. Again, cushions built into those bulwarks, very little in the way of furniture. We do get an aft facing 3-man bench, and you can also spec an additional bench along the back end to make it feel that bit more sociable. But they tell me that that optional bench is a rigid one, and I'm surprised by that, because conventionally you would tend to have drop-down benches that enable you to either make it sociable or put them back up and enjoy the full parameters of that cockpit for a fish. And in truth, Invincible does use those kind of features on larger boats in the fleet. So I'm surprised it hasn't used it here on the smallest boat, the 33, where space is particularly at a premium. But they tell me it's very much a no compromise kind of boat, so that's not a feature that you get. And you don't get any cooking facilities either. You might expect a transverse galley on a more recreational, less serious fishing boat, but not so here. If you want to cook, then you can just stick a barbecue in one of the many storage spaces littered around this boat and use one of the rod holders to rig that. That's the way they tend to do it. Anyway, back to the cockpit. As I say though, this is a serious fisherman. Its features reflect that. Even though the owner of this particular model is not a fisherman, we have a big, deep live bait well back here at the transom. He uses this for storage, but because it's drained, you could easily just chuck a load of ice in here, keep your beer, your wine or your food in there. And that's pretty much the story of all the storage spaces on board this boat. They're pretty much all lined, all insulated and all drained. So if you want to use it as a day boat, it's extremely practical for that, even though it's rigged specifically as a fishing boat. And down in here in this port locker, we got the sea chest and the pumps for the salt water, so we can feed that live bait well. We've also got this 115 litre water tank there on the port side. It's not particularly big, but all that has to do is feed the freshwater washdown. There's obviously a saltwater washdown too. There's more storage over here on the port side. This is a slightly stiff handle, this one. There we are. As you can see, insulated, properly lined, properly drained. Great spaces. And there's a really impressive space beneath this bench. If I lift up this lid, it comes up on a pair of really strong rams. And look here, look at the scale of that. It's ice cold in here because we've got a nice big chill plate on that aft edge. Really handy spot. You don't need dedicated fridges when you've got proper refrigerated chests like that. Let's move around towards the helm, and as we do so, it's worth noticing that just as up in the forepeak, we've got tread plate machined into this fiberglass literally everywhere. So no, there are no side gates, but you don't need them because this is all super practical, simply for stepping on and off the pontoon without slipping. As we move towards the helm, where we got some good grab rails, well positioned, and this is the elevated structure for the owner of this boat who's a bit short, and this the elevated structure for his feet. That's why we're a bit cramped up in there, but a very good helm position nonetheless, and very well protected. These are those wings that give you extra protection from the elements there. And as we move forward, additional storage under here. I'll open that up actually, because when we move forward, you'll see we have really big spaces deep down inside that starboard hull, and of course it's the same on the other side. Absolutely cavernous. You do not want for storage on this boat at all. Let's move to the bow, ignoring this lounge seating for a second, because here we have a rigid bench. Now this is exactly what you will get in the aft cockpit should you choose to spec one there. And on first acquaintance it looks pretty much immovable, but it can't be because we need access to the anchor chain behind this hatch. So the means by which that is achieved is with this simple retaining peg there. Swing that out and that's nice and easy now. There's an additional retaining pin on the port side, so actually you can lift this entire bench off this deck, free up the deck space and just leave the bench on the pontoon if you like. So it's actually a lot more versatile than you first think. Now let's spin around and take a look at this lounge seating, because that is quite something. It's a hell of a length, substantially elevated too, and you'll see why in a second. But the details are lovely, the stitching's very attractive. These contours on both sides of each seat keep you firmly in place. There's additional contours here for lateral support, good headrests and fold down armrests right across there. We've also got cup holders down here, drained. It's not just about the rod holders on this boat. And no, not many people are going to choose to sit up here while you're underway. But really, with seating of this calibre, with bulwarks that deep and with a soft, dry ride like this boat delivers, if you're ever going to sit up in the suicide seats, this is exactly the place to do it. But there's another trick. I'll need two hands for this, because you need to lift up this entire section. Again, look at this, properly insulated, properly lined and compartmentalized. So this is really, really impressive. Look how neat and tidy everything is stowed away in here. Move those life jackets, there's an additional hatch here for stuff you don't need so readily to hand. And just as you can with all the other storage spaces on this boat, you could just fill this with food and ice, with beer and wine, and turn this fishing boat into a proper day boat. And one other feature that's going to be very welcome to people, whether you intend to use this for fishing or day boating, is this. Access through the port side of the console, a really generous head compartment, much more voluminous than you expect. There's loads of headroom for a 6-footer. That's helped partly by the fact we've got a very low profile toilet, but the volume in here is really surprising. Another really excellent storage space, larger than you think, like so many other spaces on this boat. Good access to the back of the dash equipment through 2 panels. There's an additional switch panel there, plus the switch gear for your batteries. In fact, all it really lacks is a bit of natural light, so a bit of frosted glass wouldn't hurt, either up above us in the top of the dash console, or on this bulkhead that looks out onto the starboard walkway. This then is a really effective boat, and it's effective because it doesn't try to be all things to all men. It's not full of complicated convertible furniture. It doesn't have a wet bar. It doesn't pander to the masses. It knows what it is. It's a proper offshore fishing boat. So it does a limited number of things, but it does them beautifully.